Katie Piper.
Hello, it's Katie Piper here. I'm sitting in for Dr Rangan Chatterjee, and welcome to the show that is all about helping you to feel good. Now this week we're talking about easy ways to help the planet. Next on the show, it's time for my guest, Laura Tobin. Now she's a meteorologist who presents the weather forecast on ITV's Good Morning Britain. Now I don't know if you've seen it, but Laura did an incredible documentary. Last year she travelled to Norway to report on the effects of climate change. And it was this very trip that inspired her to write her book. Her book's called Everyday Ways to Save Our Planet, and it's out now.
BBC Radio 2, Katie Piper.
Laura, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm super excited to talk to you. Got so many different questions, and you know, our theme this week is all about saving the planet. We feel so lucky to be joined by you, and I know obviously your book's out, Everyday Ways to Save Our Planet. And actually, I think, you know, that's the first thing that does come up when we think about this subject, is the anxiety around we can't save our planet. We're just the little ones. What difference can we make? And I think actually your book blasts that theory out of the water, and we are more in control than we think, perhaps.
Yeah, and the kind of whole mantra behind it was no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. I thought, you know, I'm quite green, and I'm kind of eco-conscious, and I do my bit by talking about the weather. But so many people just have now said, you know, climate change is here. Yeah, we get it. Yeah, it's us. But what can I do, and will it make a difference? And that's when I started to look into it, and I was like, lots and yes. And then I overwhelmed myself because I literally tried to do a billion things right at the beginning of research in the book, try to change this, try to change that, blah, 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 blah. And my husband was like, what are you doing now? What crazy eco venture have you got today or this week? And it was too much. I tried to do too much right at the beginning. And actually, it was going to be called 101 Ways to Save the Planet. And then I was like, guys, I've got 150 now. And it kept going up. And they were like, right, we'll change the title then.
Well, that's reassuring. For people like me that feel so helpless, it's actually very comforting and reassuring. Can you give us sort of your top 2 or 3 practical tips that perhaps the listeners could take on board?
Okay, so like food is a massive one. Food waste is 10% of all of our emissions. So 4 times all of our flying is just food that we throw away. And I think it's so easy to think that stuff to do and be green costs money. Everything you can do to reduce food waste will save you money. You know, we throw away 6 meals a week in the UK on average. And food is expensive, and it's getting more expensive. So actually planning your meals, freezing your meals, making sure that anything that's left over is composted or put into the curbside recycling, and it can go and it makes compost and fertilizer. That makes such a massive difference. So like that would be my number one thing. And I mean, there's a theme through the book that my husband is really tight, like really tight. And loads of the things that we do anyway, we do because he's just really tight and they save money.
It's good to be frugal. Like we all want to hear these tips.
Yeah, well, there's frugal and there's tight. You're right. But even just lowering the thermostat by 1 degree saves 10% on your bills in a year. Okay. That's huge. And then all of the things like lagging your walls, your ceilings, even closing curtains. If you close your curtains at dusk, it will save about 17% of your emissions in a year in your household. 75% of our emissions are how we heat our homes, how we travel, and how we eat. But then the other 25% are all those like little quirky ones, like recycling, right? It's a crazy thing. And we have 48 million glass jars and bottles that go into rubbish that could be recycled every year just because people put them in the bins. That's enough to fill the Empire State Building every 3 weeks.
That's an awful
image,
and you're just like,
yeah. That's so easy. It's so easy to do. So just take a step back and just think about what you're doing. And my daughter will say, Mummy, what are you doing with that? I said, I'm putting it in the bin. And she says, you mean digging a hole in the ground and putting it in our earth? And I'm like, oh yeah, like now you make me feel really bad. But
sounds like there's a book in her, I think we need a book from her.
Katie Piper on BBC Radio 2.
It's interesting because you are so knowledgeable, and you know, you're a meteorologist. You know, we see you on Good Morning Britain reading the weather, and we saw you visit Norway last year for your documentary. And, you know, there were moments in that documentary where I sensed you found climate change very overwhelming. Could you talk to me a bit about what it was you saw when you went to Norway?
Yeah, it blew my mind. I just love science and I love reading all of the climate reports. And I was talking to the Met Office scientists who wrote some of the IPCC reports about the cryosphere, and the cryosphere is frozen parts of our planet. And I thought, yeah, I know how the glaciers are retreating. They're at their lowest extent in 2,000 years. It's causing sea levels to rise. And I kind of knew the science picture, but I don't even know why I hadn't realised what the reality would look like. And we got to Svalbard and we went there because it's warming more than anywhere else on Earth. So in the poles, it's warming like 2 to 3 times faster than the rest of the planet. But they were warming 6 times more than everywhere else. And so obviously the more it warms, the more the ice melts and the more the glaciers melt. And I met this guy who'd arrived 40 years ago, and I was literally about to turn 40. And we stood in this like barren bit of rock. And he said, this is where the glacier ended 40 years ago. And we looked up the hill and like over a mile away was the end of the glacier. And I was like, wow. And he went, no, that's not it. He went, look up. And he was like 10 metres above your head. That was all ice. And you're like imagining this massive vision of ice. And you're like, gee, that's all gone. It's not coming back. It's all gone into the oceans. And he's like, that's just one glacier on this one island. It's happening everywhere, across the Arctic and the Antarctic. And I just suddenly was like, I saw the reality of it. And then I was talking to a guy who runs lots of tourism. And he was saying the ski season is shrinking. The snow season is shrinking. And there's a place called the Ice Fjord there. And it hasn't frozen over in the summer for ages, but it always freezes over in the winter. And then 5 years ago, it just didn't. And it's not frozen over since. And they used to take the snowmobiles out and the scooters, and they used to do husky dog rides. They used to do all sorts of activities on the ice. And he was like, for 1 year, his business had no business. He had to phone everyone and say, there's no ice, you can't come. He had to kind of come up with new innovative ideas to do stuff inland. So the whole tourism has changed. And then the polar bears, they now go out and try and swim and find fish. But there's not Arctic fish anymore, it's Atlantic fish, and they're completely different. It doesn't give them the nutrients, so they're swimming further and they haven't got the food, so they're dying. And there's more rainfall rather than snowfall. I heard about how the wildlife is changing and how the tourism is changing, how the landscape's changing, and they hardly emit anything. And I'm like, it's because of what the developed world does. And it feels so far away. But, you know, ice is like reflects all the heat back into space, and when it melts, it absorbs more. So the more land we have and the more sea and the less ice, it makes it warm even more. So I was really overwhelmed by just everything we saw, and I couldn't sleep for weeks afterwards, just realising the reality of what it is.
Yeah, it sounds like it was quite a life-changing trip. Do you think it changed you as a person when you came back then? Yeah,
it definitely did. And it was really bad because timing-wise, it was my daughter's first week at starting school ever.
Oh, no.
And I missed that. And, you know, people would say, you know, you missed this. And I did miss it, but I gained so much from the trip I did. And she understood why I was going. And we met this really cool guy, this scientist called Kim Holman. He was like, people need to stop seeing making changes to tackle climate change as a negative thing. He was like, the positive outcome is saving the planet. And along the way, you will save money, you'll be healthier, and you will learn more about yourself or about the world around us. You know, in the pandemic, we all rushed outside, we stopped driving our cars, and we all felt so much better for it.
Yeah,
so
we did.
I just think I've stepped back from everything even more, you know, and just really tried to minimise my footprint. I don't want it to be like, you have to go and do this, you have to go and do that. But honestly, just like those few little things that you can do, and then you'll be hooked.
BBC Radio 2, Katie Piper.
Well, while we're on the subject of investigating where things are happening, I heard a really funny fact about you. And
Go on.
Correct me if it's wrong.
Yeah.
Is it true that you've gone through other people's bins to make sure they're recycling properly?
Yeah, I did it this morning to poor Harry in the green room. I do it every day, everywhere I go.
Laura Tobin, neighbour from hell.
So I went into makeup on last week, and I opened the bin because I had to put chewing gum in, something legitimately that needed to go in the bin. And I saw his little cereal box, and I went, who had cereal? And one of them went, it was me. And I went, this is cardboard, it could be recycled. She said, I didn't know where the recycling was. And I said, you've worked here for 6 years, you know where the recycling is. And then she was eating her cereal with a plastic spoon, and I said, what are you doing? She said, I got this from the canteen. I was like, next door there's a kitchen with spoons. And she was like, oh yeah, but I'd have to wash it up. And I'm like, wash it up then. So yeah,
people are just going to have to hide everything in their handbags from you and take it home and just bin it.
This morning Harry had like a plastic milk bottle and also a cereal box. I just opened the bin, I was like, Harry! He was like, sorry. So, yeah.
We should talk a bit about I wondered what inspired you initially to study weather. Was there something in your life that inspired you to take this path?
This is my cool/not cool story about how I loved the jet stream. So I loved science at school, but I also loved art, and I kind of had these like two brains, which are kind of usually quite like far apart. And my My geography teacher, when I was 14, taught us about the weather and said to the girls and boys, right, we're going to learn about the jet stream. You're going to row up as girls, row up as boys, and then run to the other side of the classroom, pushing into each other. We started in a straight row and we ended all wiggly on the other side. And he said, right, what you represented there was the warm air and the cold air from the North Pole and the equator bumping into each other. And that is how ripples of the jet stream develop. And that is why the weather in the UK changes, because we're either under it or over it or the other side of it. And I just was like, boom, that's cool. I went home and told my mum and dad and phoned the Met Office like the next day to find out what GCSEs and then what A-levels and what degree. And then kind of, went from there. So I was just really lucky to know from like 14.
Now, this is the only health and wellbeing show on Radio 2. And I think, your book is going to be so powerful for listeners. I'm going to name check it again in case anyone's missed it. It's Everyday Ways to Save Our Planet. And I think, when talking about climate change, we have to include solutions and things that we can do. Otherwise, it can be bad for our anxiety. So really, really recommend that to anyone. Is there any more books on the way, actually? If there's going to be more trips, perhaps there's more books.
The amount of people that I've met who are doing really great things, like people who are using clothes companies who are using fishing nets to turn old fishing nets into new clothing. Recently worked with a really cool wine company, Hidden Sea, who rescue 10 bottles of plastic from the ocean for every bottle that they sell. And I'm doing this new climate ambassador scheme where the University of Reading are working with the UK government to make sure that climate change can be included in syllabuses and what schools can do. So I'm going around the country to do that. And I'm just so inspired to see so many people doing so many great things. And it's nice to give them all a shout out and just to feel that there's hope and promise. And all of the, I don't mean little people in a derogatory way, but all of the little people reaching up and showing governments that it's possible, and then them reaching down and giving the funds to expand it. I think I saw a thing today from America saying that they have 95% of the technology to make 100% of the country renewable. They just need the finances to do it. We're lucky that we don't use much of the fossil fuels coming from then, and we'll be able to be sustainable by the end of the year. But the rest of Europe are really looking now at green being a massive way to move forward and be free. And, Earth has given us everything we need for free. The wind, the sun, the waves, to make all of our power.
Oh, it's been so brilliant to talk to you. And, if you haven't seen Laura's documentary, please do check it out. And please do check her book out, Everyday Ways to Save Our Planet. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you too. And good luck. I hope we can all save the planet together.
Everyday Ways to Save Our Planet by Laura Tobin is out now.